Amir, welcome to Stories in AI. How are you today?
Doing very well, Ganesh. Thank you so much for the invitation. Good to see you again.
Great to see you. And I know you've been like running a very tight schedule, so really appreciate you taking the time. Why don't we kick us off with your story, your personal story? I mean, you are just an amazing individual. You have so much accomplishments. Tell us your background story.
Well, I'll give you the short version here. I was born in Lahore, Pakistan, and since a very young age, I've been into computing and software. As I've written in my book, The Sentient Machine, I came across a Commodore 64 at the age of 4, and I saw the Hangman game being played on this computer, and it was completely mind blowing to me that you could have a device that could alter what was going on the TV. Because up until that point in time, it was sort of this idea of the TV was not fungible, nothing would change, it would just be programming, delivered from the airwaves, and that's what you would see. But to be able to sort of directly manipulate that and then thinking about the potential of what that means, my mind immediately went to, this is a mechanism to create worlds. You can build your own anything you want because you can control what you see on the screen. And sort of my imagination took flight from there. And one of I think, the big blessings, of which there are many. I am a blessed, very lucky person. But in this regard, one of the blessings was that I've really never wanted to do anything else. I knew at that point that this is what I wanted to apply my abilities and my time to, and this is how I would impact the world. So, or at least I would try. So that's been sort of the underlying theme, the overarching trend of my life. Long story short, I went to school in Lahore, and by the time I got to the eighth grade, I was pretty much quite fed up, and I convinced my parents and my principal, who was a wonderful person, to allow me to leave, and I took my O levels and A levels privately, which is the British, system,
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
high school plus 1 year up until the first year of college. And so I joined college in Lahore, pursuing a computer science degree at the age of 15. I graduated when I was 17 and a half. And then I'd been I'd published a couple of papers by that time in AI at IEEE Systems Man and Cybernetics. And I was looking to join a research group that I was very motivated by, that I just loved the work they were doing. And that research group happened to be at UT Austin at the computer science department. So I applied to UT, I got in, I made a beeline for the distributed multimedia computation lab, which was this
Yeah.
research group. I got in, and I was working towards my PhD, dropped out of the PhD, started a few companies, and here I am some years later.
That's amazing. What an amazing story. I mean, you've seen the entire evolution of the industry, and in a large amount, you've been part of shaping that industry as it evolves to, and where AI is today, right? It's when you originally started, to expert systems, to symbolic logic, to now more data driven machine learning, combination of all those different approaches, to people asking what is AI, to now saying how do I use AI to impact the business or the life. And so give me your perspective of the market today. How has the evolution of AI been since you got into the journey?
Very early days. I think, look, you've got to have some perspective here as to what we're trying to do. People that are pursuing artificial intelligence in its pure form are looking to replicate, human level or beyond human level capabilities in specific areas, and eventually across all areas as a general capability. That's a huge goal. I mean, it took evolution, on this planet 4+ billion years to get to where we are, and we're trying to do it in a generation or two. So,
Yeah.
when people say, you promised me this level of capability 10 years ago and it's still not there, it's okay. 10 years here or there on those types of timescales are not very important. But directionally, are we adding more capability within these narrow areas? Yes. There is a school of thought that says that the path that we're on, with deep learning as an example,
Yep.
might not yield general purpose intelligence. Jeff Hinton actually disagrees, and he recently put out a piece, an article, where he said, look, this might be everything we need. My view is, while I'm very interested in the theoretical developments, and I have, you know, contributed to some of those as well. But my view is that the way this gets done is by building it and by learning from building. And so that's really been my focus. The state of the industry, as I said, is still very nascent in these terms. Now, when it comes to the enterprise and it comes to products and the practical elements of adopting AI in business, you don't need to solve AGI in order for AI to be valuable for companies. You don't need that level of capability to, for example, figure out automatically whether or not to approve or deny a loan. So there are so many things that you can apply this technology to today. And I feel that organizations that take a lead in doing that, taking the technology as it exists today, and simply creating this internal organizational structure that enables them to apply this technology at scale, that they will be the winners of this round. And that really is, I think, the important message to get across.
Oh, that's a very fair point. In fact, I think it's like saying and you actually started off saying this, and I don't know whether in fact you were hinting on it. I don't know whether you actually meant it, but if you really look at the evolution, the 13.5 billion years of the universe and 4.5 billion years of the Earth, and humanity is what, 250,000 years, and we're still a small speck. If you really take a look at this and say technology evolution to create intelligent systems, right, as an approach. But instead of going the academic route, what you're saying is taking a very pragmatic, practical approach, saying, I have a bag of tools, a bag of technologies, and I have a bag of problems. Can I apply the right problems for the right tools to the right problems and solve it and make a difference to the industry? When you started SparkCognition, Amir, you chose the hard industries, the industrial environments, the defense, aviation, aeronautics, and typically people will look at those industries and say they're laggards. They're so far behind. They're the last to adopt. What have you seen? What was your lessons and learnings there when you went into that industry, and why did you choose that industry, those set of industries?
I think entrepreneurship is one of the most difficult things you can willingly do. You choose to be an entrepreneur, and it tests you in every way, personally, professionally, all your relationships, monetarily, psychologically, any way you look at it. So what keeps you going is some faith, some belief. Some like to call it passion. If you try to be an entrepreneur in an area and you are disingenuous to what motivates you, then you won't go very far, because you just can't keep operating at that level with that kind of hardship and difficulty facing you every day. So what all that says is that I certainly wasn't going to pursue an area that I wasn't particularly excited by, or that I didn't really believe in the cause. There are practical applications of AI, for example, in customizing and tuning marketing messages. It's very viable. It makes a lot of money. There's a large number of companies pursuing that. That's not my personal passion. And so my personal passion is how the world works, the $100 trillion worth of infrastructure that runs the world, that produces everything that we consume, that allows us the ability to rapidly transport our freight and ourselves from one place to another, that keeps us safe, that produces the electricity, that warms our homes, that is basically what makes the world go round. And there's $100 trillion worth of that stuff, and it's being it's seeing a lot of pressure from four key areas. One of which is climate change. We are undeniably in a period where man-made climate change has essentially become the defining problem to tackle this century and beyond. And in that context, this infrastructure still needs to run. You can't replace $100 trillion worth of stuff overnight. but we do expect it to run with with a minimal carbon footprint. How do we do that? If we're not going to rip and replace it, how do we minimize emissions? So how do we deal with this relationship of the environmental, benefits that we want to drive and the reality of the infrastructure? That's just one pressure. The other is, geopolitics right now. If you look around, you'll find some cyber attack against the Colonial Pipeline or some shipping line or a
Yeah.
power plant. It's daily fare. It happens every day. How do you keep this infrastructure secure in the coming days? Then we're losing people with certain skill sets. Pilots that are joining the U.S. commercial fleet on average don't have as much experience as they once did. People that are maintaining our electric utilities and grid industries don't have as much experience coming in now, and many of our best maintainers are past retirement age. So, how do you bridge these knowledge gaps? How do you, as an infrastructure operator, deliver the type of growth that the market has become used to? And unless you deliver that growth, you don't get multiples, you don't have a currency of any value, and you are forever trying to just keep up as opposed to building a healthy business. So these are four key pressures on infrastructure, and I think all of them can be alleviated by careful application of artificial intelligence. In the next 15 to 20 years, by the way, we're going to collectively invest in another $100 trillion worth of infrastructure. So, why am I excited about this? Why did I choose the hard problems? Because in many ways, they're the only problems that matter. These are the problems that define how people are fed and how efficient it is for people to move from place A to place B, for mobility, to be able to do jobs that make them more successful, to be able to do all of this while making the environment cleaner and while living in more sustainable conditions. This is all the stuff that matters. The rest of it is at the periphery.
That's fair. No, it's a very, very beautifully said. It's you chose that those set of industries, especially infrastructure, securing infrastructure, making the generational transition easy on the infrastructure so that we're able to keep it sustainable, and then limiting the impact of the environment. But that's also not the set of industries that usually are tech first or tech heavy, if you will, right? So what was the other side of this? What did you learn when you actually worked with them? Were they too unprepared? Did you have to do a lot of heavy lifting? How was that experience?
It's difficult, no question. When you look at the nature of an infrastructure company, you tend to be dealing with companies that are very old, right? Because if you think about car companies in the US, they've been around for a long time. You think about many aviation and defense companies in the US, they've been around for decades, right? And
Yep.
if you look at utilities, same case for them. So these are all companies that are very old, very entrenched. And in that kind of an environment, people that are operating there, most of them kind of tend to know what they need to do in order to succeed and survive. And therefore, asking for some drastic internal change is just more difficult, number one. Number two, you're essentially coming to them as not a domain expert in their area, but as somebody that's bringing the new technology to apply to their domain. And you're
Mhm.
asking them to look at things differently, right? And there's that healthy kind of skepticism, which says, well, who are you? Who are you to tell me what to do? I've been around running this company for 100 years, and we've survived through thick and thin, and this new technology, why would it be impactful, and why should we pay attention? So there are all those types of reasons. And then, of course, within these companies, they tend to be large. They're old and they're also large, which means that there's a lot of people and a lot of processes and a lot of layers and a lot of collective buy-in and all of this to achieve before you can do something meaningful. So both those things in concert mean that engagement with these companies is difficult and it can be slow. What can change the game is if you're able to develop relationships with leaders who have seen the future, who believe in that future, a technology driven future which represents great hope for their company, a transformative potential for their company. that drives that kind of ability to deliver growth while doing so responsibly, that the leaders that care about the environment and want to look at applications of AI for ESG, and things of that nature. And once you have those believers, the C-level executives, generally the CEO, who is moving forward with you as a partner, then other things become simpler. You can't wave a wand in a company that size, no matter what. But I think without having support from the top, you can't do much at all. And that to me was the challenge initially. Now, I have to say, over the last 7.5, 8 years, a lot of companies have looked at others who've succeeded with specific AI initiatives. We have a large list of very successful AI deployments, large AI deployments in oil and gas, in the military, in energy more broadly, in sustainable means of producing energy, with automotive partners. And so when you look at all of that, it gives people confidence in aviation. It gives people confidence, and the next one becomes easier, and the one after that becomes easier. So that's really what we're all about. We're totally focused on overcoming these difficulties which we encountered in our early days through products, through repeatability, through systems that have been proven, through ROIs that have been validated by our customers. And that then becomes the reason to adopt, not that this is AI or it's some other kind of technology. It's just the smart thing to do. And on a pure business level, from an ROI standpoint, from a referenceability standpoint, from a repeatability standpoint, is ready to go. And that in many ways becomes the ultimate argument for your incremental customers to continue the adoption wave.
Awesome, Amir. And I think, to summarize, it's not the challenges within these more legacy or older industries aren't necessarily super unique, but they're just bigger because it's still the challenge around making sure domain expertise, change management at scale, managing the complexity, and it all comes back to how do you build the relationships, demonstrate that you're credible, solve problems for them, and then incrementally earning their trust to do more, right? So, and it's the same challenges. One thing, in that same regard, like you touched upon defense and, the work that you do a lot of work. You have a SparkCognition Defense Systems at a subsidiary company as well. What is the future of, and I want to touch upon, you've done a lot of work here, you've written a lot of papers on this stuff too, but what's the future of national security in an age of AI, in the age of machines?
Well, I think, just to make it very brief, I'll say three things. Number one, yes, indeed, General Allen, who's also on our SparkCognition board, he and I have over many, many years done a lot of work alongside Secretary Bob Work and General Tony Thomas and Admiral Richardson and Secretary Disbrow and many other partners in really examining the application of AI to the battlefield. It's an area that we call hyperwar. This idea that decisions can be collapsed, the time required to make decisions can be collapsed to the point where humans will find it very difficult to keep up and ultimately won't be able to keep up with them. And then all of the operational, tactical, and strategic implications of that transition occurring. That's a very big subject, obviously, and there's many implications, both from the use of kinetic weapons, to logistics, to readiness, to training. It broadly applies across every area. But the second piece to think about also is the geostrategic implication of the use of artificial intelligence. Because one of the things that it does is that it enables middle powers to exercise a lot more, to express themselves, let's just say, through kinetic means and through these systems in a much more assertive way. There have been many conflicts across the Middle East, as an example, in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria, and most importantly in Nagorno-Karabakh, the disputed territory between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And in all of these areas, we've seen more and more autonomy, more and more of the next generation systems drones, using AI with machine vision, even completely autonomous weapon systems. And these have resulted in an advantage. So that's a statement of fact. And when a weapon system in the battlefield demonstrates an advantage, then the other side can't really have a philosophical discussion around that. Then the only thing to do is to match that capability. And this becomes that cycle that causes these developments to continue to grow. So, just based off of this trend, I can tell you that investments in autonomous technologies are being doubled and trebled and quadrupled all over the world. I just came back from the Dubai Air Show, which is one of the largest air shows in the world, and it has companies from all over the world. And what I came across was autonomous product after autonomous product, drone after drone, sensors with integrated AI for machine vision, all of these types of things that are piece parts and components of a future hyperwar scenario. So to me, it's no longer a discussion point. It's really actually happening in the way that the investments are being made. So, yeah, I mean, if your question is what is the future of war, I think war is intrinsically linked to the human condition. And until the human condition changes and the nature of man changes, the nature of humankind changes, I don't think we can expect that war, which is essentially kinetic competition, the failure of politics, whatever you want to call it, that this will somehow disappear. And if it is not going to disappear, then we will continue to apply our most advanced technologies and capabilities to the conduct of war. And today, our most advanced technologies are AI and hyperwar technologies. And we're already now seeing instances of that unfolding in small scale conflicts. Now, there's a lot of experts that are looking at the Ukraine-Russia situation, and if that were to take if that were to become a shooting war, I hope it doesn't. But that's another area where it's almost certain that autonomy will be used in serious ways. So yes, this is unfortunately the trend, and it's not very different to through history, whenever we've developed an advanced technology, we've applied it to war. It's sort of the common thread that runs through the history of mankind.
No, it's very well put. I think one of the challenges, like, I had someone from Northrop Grumman also on the show earlier, and one of the big challenges, even the DoD is also thinking about, the war is no longer going to be in an international frontier in a desert anymore. It's that pipeline that's going to blow up. It's that the connectivity that's going to be cut out. It's the power outage that's going to hit the hospital systems. It's coming to the mainland. It's not just at the frontiers, right? And the whole approach of using technology beyond just weaponry becomes an important element of national security, right?
Definitely, there are so many areas in which systems like these can impact a society. As you mentioned, all the examples you gave are essentially cyber examples. What we were talking about earlier, protecting infrastructure against cyber attack, taking out your water supply, your energy systems, and so on. And then beyond that, in the information sphere, being able to use information operations aided by AI to create actual conflict within a society. I mean, there are documented cases of this in prior election campaigns where people sitting in a foreign country have targeted two opposing groups on Facebook and caused physical altercations, arranged events, events that would otherwise not have even come to pass, but arranged those events, caused two people that they predicted would come to blows, and they did come to blows, and remotely triggered this type of unrest within the US. These are, again, well documented. So my point is, the way in which this kind of advanced technology can impact a society, yes, is varied, and it's not just the bombs and the missiles. It's also the cyber attacks. It's also the knowledge-based information warfare, AI-based information warfare. That's a threat.
One of the all the hype around, or all the immediate momentum around the metaverse, and alternate universes in the metaverse kind of give me, one of the things, one of the interesting use cases would be war, right? In like gamification of wars in a metaverse, so people don't get hurt. Now, it could lead to other consequences, and getting physically hurt may not be the worst thing, right? But I always think of that as like, maybe imagine, like, America wants to go to war with China. They basically get on a metaverse and play Go. At the end of it, depending on how the scorecard looks, you can actually affect the economic policies and stuff. Nobody gets hurt, but that's to assume that getting hurt is the worst thing that could happen physically, right? But it's probably not in
Yeah.
scenarios of war.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
that's a very interesting thought experiment. Of course, the idea behind war, of course, is to bend the other to your will. If you can't do it by talking, if you can't do it through diplomacy, if you can't do it through politics, then you do it through physical means. And that fundamental nature of war does not change. In the context of the metaverse, it would be lovely if we could just have a Call of Duty confrontation between two countries. Nobody dies. There's no physical damage, and then both countries agree that that's the rule. Anybody that wins, they
yeah,
just win in the real world. But sadly, in the real world, they still possess capability, and that capability will still express itself, because as long as the goal that they have is sufficient and still paramount, they'll keep going up until when they can't go anymore. And that's really what you've seen with war. So I think, maybe in the future, when most of the resources that are of interest are in the metaverse, then there will be wars within the metaverse too.
within the
What
metaverse.
are those resources? And that gets us into cryptography and the blockchain, and
Yep.
virtual assets of high value residing only within this new domain of the metaverse. Blockchain type assets. So yeah, I mean, I can see that type of a future, but I think physical war is still around for a long, long time.
For our timeline, for sure, right? No doubt. Thank you for exploring that a little bit with me. One of the things that the view of AI itself is pretty polarized, right? I mean, there is everything from the Hollywood driven narratives and Skynets and everything, right? And you talked about in your Sentient Machine book around how humans and humankind can thrive in that age of machines, right? Can you explore that a little bit for me, for the
Sure.
audience?
So one of the core ideas behind the sentient machine was this exploration of what happens when machines can do all your jobs. Let's assume that we had AGI, and that therefore these machines are now able to do everything that a human being is able to do in terms of earning money and doing a job. And in that case, are we useless? Are we as human beings useless? And of course, what does useless mean? Because useless is in some context, right? So far we've defined our use as our ability to earn a living, provide for our families, keep our families together, keep our families safe, and that's sort of been how we've defined use. But if all of that is being done for you, then what is your purpose? And so the question shifts from use to purpose. So what is your purpose? Now, there is no one definitive answer to this, because really
Or
the answer is everybody has to find their own purpose. But the direction that I took in the sentient machine was to say that, look, for all we know, the human brain is the ultimate creation of the universe, and its cognitive capacity is unparalleled. And we have no other evidence of anywhere in the universe of anything this marvelous and miraculous existing. Something
sure,
that can exist inside a small human head and can attempt to understand the secrets of this vast universe. There is no such thing in existence. So, if this is our ultimate quality, it's not that we run the fastest. There are animals that outrun us. It's not that we're the strongest. There are animals that are stronger than us. It's not that we're the biggest, but we are the most intelligent. So that's the singular capability. Could our purpose be tied to the use of that singular capability, the mind? And what would that purpose be? That purpose might be that the universe is, yes, physical space, and yes, the universe is time, but the universe is also another thing. The universe is an idea verse. The universe is a collection of an infinite number of undiscovered ideas. very practical ideas, very esoteric ideas, ideas that make us see some insight that leads to Maxwell's equations, ideas that make us see some dream that results in the most beautiful poem ever written, ideas of every kind. And the mind of a human is, in some sense, a surfer amidst ideascape. We're going and we're uncovering and finding these ideas. And the purpose of our most high faculty, our cognitive faculty, is to uncover these ideas. So that perhaps might reflect the role of humankind even in a post AI era. Because you would say, well, how does that work? Because wouldn't AIs be outperforming humans and thinking a million times or a billion times faster than a human brain? Well, it turns out that when you are talking about an infinite landscape of ideas, speed becomes irrelevant. By definition, no matter what the speed of an AI, no matter what the speed of a computer, it will take exactly as much time as your human brain will in uncovering all ideas, which means infinite time. It will never uncover all those ideas. So, really, if you now imagine this landscape of ideas laid out in front of you, what matters more than speed is where you are in this landscape, where you are instantiated in
That's
this
your
landscape.
vantage point.
Because
Yeah.
around that is where you explore. And a way to express this idea of being instantiated in that landscape is perspective. It's not about how fast you think, it's about what perspective you bring to this purpose of discovering knowledge and discovering ideas. And that holds even in an age of AI, even in an age of quantum computers and computers that are faster than we've ever dreamt of before, and even in an age of computronium, all of this, the validity of perspective and the unique ability to uncover ideas simply because you are different, you think that way, you are in a different part of idea space, all that holds. That to me is tied to human purpose.
That's quite amazing what you just laid out. I mean, the more pragmatist in me also, technically, if you think about it, you can solve a bounded problem with better machines and better infrastructure. But if it's an unbounded problem, like you said, it's an ever expanding sea of ideas, the machines are not going to be any better or more intelligent than the human brain to uncover it. So that's one thing. And then the second thing, the idea of perspective, like you talked about, I think it's such a core thing, and it kind of can tie it back to the fact that we are aware of our presence and we have the availability and the understanding of the faculty that there is a vantage point and that this is me, right? So it's quite beautiful, but I must confess, I haven't read Sentient Machine fully, but I'm gonna now with that intro, I'm gonna go back and dig in a little bit more on that. So thanks, Amir. So one coming back to organizations and practical AI in applications that we're having, right? Trust and ethics in AI is a huge topic now. Responsible AI. I mean, can you trust the machines to actually make decisions for you versus not? So the flip side of it, organizations are also thinking, how do I govern this? I mean, there is the technical governance capabilities like your MLOps platforms and so forth that you need, or practices that you need. But beyond that, there is something more deeper, something more holistic that you need to govern AI systems or semi-automated or fully automated systems, right? What have you seen? What is your perspective on it? What have you seen that's working within organizations, and how are they governing AI? Or do we need to worry about governing AI?
Well, this might be a little controversial. I think at the heart of it, the ethics issues with AI are not really a technology question. Ethics, by definition, is something that really applies to humans and human society. And the context in which ethics apply to technology is how humans use that technology. What's different with AI is that there's this notion that AI is just off on its own, doing its own thing, and therefore, what are the ethics of AI independently? But really, who built that AI? Who trained that AI? What information was provided to that AI in order to facilitate its training? And all of those were human actions. So ultimately, with where we are right now, the ethics of AI is no different to the ethics of the application of technology by humans. Uh, the unique problems that we're encountering in this space come from, on the one hand, things like biases in data, right? So neural networks or classification algorithms that are trained might be misbalanced, and they might have more of one example of an ethnicity and less of another. And therefore, when you provide an image of an ethnicity that algorithm hasn't seen enough training images for, it might not recognize them. It might give them a bad experience. It might make it twice or thrice as tedious to deal with that AI enabled flow. And is that fair? If you're a certain color, you can just breeze by. If you're a different color, then it's inconvenient for you. That's not fair, obviously. Objectively, it's not fair.
Yep.
But we know why that happens, and we know that that issue is around data, training data, and the biases in that data. And of course, I've given you a very simple instance of this. There are many, many
Sure.
examples of data bias that can cause problems. Another issue is, what should we do with AI? So you were talking about war earlier. For example, should an AI system be able to kill without having the human at the very end saying, "Go ahead and fire that individual bullet"? Okay. Well, the answer to that question is that today that's not the case. There are autonomous systems that can take out targets once they've been enabled, and they're enabled within some constraints, like in this area, or
Sure.
within this target space, or for this amount of time. You are enabled, and you can now take out targets. So that was the human decision. If you think about it, that's not very difficult to you pulling the lanyard or an artillery piece, because when you fire an artillery shell, you don't know exactly what it's going to do. You know that you have qualified a certain target area, but there's variability in this. And even today, we have collateral damage. Where does that come from? Collateral damage, by definition, is damage caused by a person initiating a kinetic action towards a target, and that
Unintended.
damage is unintended. But coming away from war, now think about it in context of, can you use AI algorithms to watch your workforce and then rank your workforce by efficiency? How many boxes did they pick up? How much volume did they move? How many boxes did they load up into a truck? And then rank them and then say, okay, these are the most efficient 95, these are the least efficient 5. And I don't really need to talk to anybody. I don't need to interview them and figure out what their family situation is, or whether they're doing well or not. The algorithm ranks them consistently as the bottom 5% performers, and the algorithm can generate an email firing them, and then also automatically send a message cutting off their paychecks. And it's all a completely automatic process. Now, you and I know that this is not fiction, it's already been done. The
Yep.
question is this the type of thing that society deems ethical? I'm not one to say that it is or it is not. I'm simply saying that the issue of ethics is less about the technology and more about the people who knowingly and willfully apply technology to achieve a certain end. And so the ethics that must be enforced at the level of the human or the human organization that's pushing forward
Absolutely.
such systems.
No, no, I completely agree with you personally on this note, because one of the things that people use AI and or automated systems or any piece of technology as a facade to absolve the responsibility they have in the process, right? Which is something that we're seeing everywhere. I mean, that's why you're having this conversation. I didn't know this was happening. Well, you built the system with a particular parameter. You're have to take responsibility for the actions that comes out of that system, right? And that's one. On the technical side, you're exactly right. I mean, yes, there are still technical problems that you need to encounter: understanding data, training data sets, bias, overfitting, explainability with deep neural networks. How do I understand what's happening within the model? But those are the I would characterize as, I know it's not technically easy, but those are the easier problems than the
Yeah.
broader human problems that we have to go solve. And then the other big questions in my mind has always been, we call ethics. There's no global code of ethics, right? Whose ethics? Is it ethics of a country like China, the way they actually implement their AI systems? Is it ethics of Saudi Arabia? Is it ethics of the United States? I mean, there is so much subjectivity in this process that the only common thread is actually align the responsibility and accountability squarely on the human beings or the human organizations behind it. So, absolutely, absolutely agree with you. Okay,
the
and
other
we
thing, yeah,
go
the other
ahead.
thing, Dinesh, is that there's a lot of people that take stuff like this and then go sit on their high horse. That I'm talking about ethics, and look at me, how ethical I am, and I'm trying to push this sort of ethics agenda. And I tell you what, I'll give you an example. Here in the West, in the US, in our own country, where there's so many things that are right, right? And there's so many things that we have, that we aspire to emulate and to spread through the world, because we
Yep.
genuinely believe these are principles that benefit humanity. But even in our country, there's this expression: what value of a human life? Infinite value of a human life. How many times have you heard people say that? Is that though how we run our society? When you go talk to an insurance company and they price out an insurance policy on a person, do you think they calculate infinite dollars as the value of a human life? The answer is no. When
No.
you go talk to a recruiter in a service, in a military service of a country, and you say, look, people go to war, the way of war is people die. And so, what is the value of that human life? Is it infinite? Obviously, not even in the context of the actions of war is that value of life infinite. And you go through these sorts of things. So the point is, the euphemistic "I'm on my high horse, the value of human life is infinite." The reality is that in the real world, people are making uh, choices all the time, and even choices about things that are the holiest of holies, life itself. But this is the way the world is running even now without AI. Insurance companies don't need AI to price out the value of a human life, but they're doing it.
True. Oh, very true. No, it's actually there is so much rhetoric and there is so much euphemisms around this, right? But the practical realities of the matter, it just it's so subjective. I think there is no right or wrong answer,
Yeah.
and I don't think there ever will be a right or wrong answer, right, on this particular thing. Um, Bring it home for me for the audience. Like most of the audience are business leaders and folks who are practitioners in the industry. What is your advice for organizations embarking or scaling their AI and data journeys in general?
My advice is go as fast as you can. And the reason for it is that any downsides of going fast are essentially trivial compared to the losses you will see if you don't get up to speed with autonomous decision making technology, AI, autonomous control technology, AI, autonomous optimization technology, AI. So go full speed ahead and adopt this technology. It's also quite clear that this is difficult to do, and therefore, not every company will be able to recruit the very few real AI people that are out there in the industry. Not every company will be able to build its own team. So you've got to have a partnership orientation. And as a leader, one of the things you should look for in your organization is not invented here syndrome, meaning that teams inside your company are telling you that we're just not incapable of working with partners, and something that's not invented within our four walls can't possibly have value. Because if you take that approach, there are such few AI experts really in the world that you won't be able to make progress, because you won't be able to create a large enough team internally. So that's number two. The third is that while it is true in many cases that you need data in order to make progress with AI, I feel that this has now become more of an excuse. AI is much larger than machine learning, and machine learning is much larger than deep learning. And not every type of deep learning requires large amounts of data. In fact, we operate in many environments where we have to predict the failure of a system that has not failed millions of times. So we don't have millions of pictures of a dog and a cat to train on. We have maybe one or two examples of the event that we're looking to predict. And there are techniques and approaches
Yep.
and capabilities within our products that you can use to answer those questions. So when somebody tells you, oh, let's wait on this AI thing for another 5 years until we clean up all our data, we collect all our data, we create the data pond, the data pool, the data river, the data, whatever the data
Big,
ocean,
big
all the different,
houses.
and so the data lake, whatever body of water, meets your fancy, let us wait for another 5 years until we collect that body of data water. No, this is now getting into excuse territory. And go back and look at what McKinsey talked about with regards to the adoption of AI, where they say that within industries, if you don't participate at the leading edge, then those of your competitors that do will develop an insurmountable advantage. Why? Because they'll go build models with data that isn't perfect. They'll come out with answers that aren't maybe perfect, but they'll very rapidly get improved, because the way machine learning works is even the wrong answer of a model is feedback to that model to make it better. And
Yeah.
then every time you run that model, you're creating more data. So very rapidly, it becomes an exponential curve of data gathering as well as of model tuning. And then there's the next generation of the model. And so by the time you as a laggard come into the space, people that are 3, 4 generations ahead of you are not on a linear curve. They are on an exponential curve ahead of you. And it becomes very difficult for you to ever compete and to ever catch up. So this is why I started off by saying the downsides of adopting AI now, even if it leads to 10 projects of which 5 work or 6 work, it's much better to do that than to sit back and say, I'm waiting for the lake to be, full of my data fish. In 5 years, I'll move on.
Oh, very, very well said. I think to summarize, you said, like, don't wait, go as fast as you can, partner with the right people, because you're not going to be able to solve this whole thing by yourself, and then make sure that you're not using data as an excuse. And it's so true, right? Because there's always that challenge of, if you talk to data management companies who are advising these customers, saying, hey, put the data structure in place, you need to get that done before you can do that. The reality is, AI is a compound interest problem, right? The earlier you start, that exponential curve you talked about, you're going to learn more, and it's going to compound towards better benefits in the long run. So thanks, Amir. This was great. I have one last question for you. You've had an amazing career. You're an inventor, you're an entrepreneur. You've started companies and startups. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are embarking on this journey, especially in the data and AI world, if you will?
Well, first of all, as I said, this is one of the hardest things you will willfully do. And so be sure that you are genuinely passionate about what it is that you're doing. When you have to make those inevitable sacrifices, at least you have a framework of justification for why all of this is happening, and it keeps you going, right? So I think that's very, very important. The second thing is, once you know that you have that passion, commit yourself fully and entirely. My advice to people that are around me always is to read a lot, okay? Because you only live one life, you only spend 24 hours a day, and even if you sleep very little, the reality is you can only experience so many hours a day. But by reading the right stuff, you are exposed in a much more compressed time frame to the experiences and the wisdom of those who have come before you. And reading broadly, I think, is extremely important. The third thing is to develop your skills. What I've found now is that there's a lot of it's almost fashionable to talk about, like, in the technology profession, this person is a technical founder, this is a non technical founder. And so, look, everybody has to basically do one of two things. Either you're building the darn thing or you're selling it. There's no third thing to do. So if you find yourself ancillary to these two purposes, then you're just deluding yourself. You're not adding value as an entrepreneur. If you're a non-technical founder, first of all, try to be technical, because you're in the technical business. You have to understand some technology in order to be credible. Why should I even buy from you if you don't understand the technology, right? As a buyer. So I'm not saying you're a whiz that can write device drivers in assembly, but you've got to understand enough technology to be credible. And if you're a technical founder, practice your art, because this is your differentiation. Practice your art. It doesn't mean that 5 years, 10 years into your company, you'll still be writing shipping code. But even Bill Gates, up until recently, I know he still programs. I still program. I try to program as much as possible. And
I saw your projects on the desktop searches that you were actually doing, search agents. Yeah.
the reason for it is not because it contributes to a shipping product at Spark Cognition, but the reason is because, first of all, it connects me with my passion. And second of all, it allows me the credibility to talk to my team members, really understanding what's going on and not talking, in generalities. It's just not the way I like to lead. So this is my advice to others as well: is be very connected with what you're doing, be competent in that field yourself, and don't shirk that responsibility and say, oh, I'm sort of just this. If you're not selling and if you're not building, then what the hell are you doing? You got to be really honest and ask yourself that question.
That's amazing. Amir, this was awesome. I have a follow on question on that. What are you reading now?
So I am extremely excited. I've just broken open the first few pages of Ray Dalio's book, The Changing World Order.
Principles. Change. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually had it on pre-order. It just arrived, so I'm already in the midst of it. But I'm also in parallel reading. If I hope I don't mangle the name, but it's Good Economics for Hard Times. It's written by a Nobel laureate, economics,
Good economics for hard times.
author. He's
Okay.
a fantastic book, and I'm learning a lot. And basically, that book explores the question of assumptions around growth. We've been a very sort of GDP growth driven culture for many
Yep.
decades. And is that really the way to deliver prosperity in an environmentally sustainable way in the future? Things that have happened in the past in the West, can they be replicated elsewhere where there are developing economies going through now the same growing pains? I'm learning a lot from that book. So yeah, and the one that I just finished, which I'll also recommend, these three books I think kind of sort of thematically linked, is the 9.9%, which is also very interesting. It has a lot of US specific statistics that I was
Yep.
not familiar with. In general terms, I was, but it has a lot of detail, and it's worth reading. You may or may not agree with it, but that's the point of a book. It gives you something to think about.
Absolutely. Amir, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for your generosity of your time and sharing this wonderful insights and perspectives to the world. Do
Absolutely.
you have any questions for me?
Ganesh, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. You've got a great platform, and I really enjoyed your questions, really enjoyed the discussion, and I look forward to engaging with your community, as the weeks and months go by.
Thank you, Amir. And one last thing, where can the viewers and listeners find you? LinkedIn?
Yeah, the easiest way is actually amirhusain.com, AmirHusain, amirhusain.com. And of course, I have Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook profiles, but really the primary
Yeah.
place is there. I have a regular Forbes column. I write quite frequently. The Sentient Machine, I would recommend to everyone here. It's available on Amazon, and that's a good starting point.
Amazing. Thank you, Amir. Thanks so much for the time, and it was a blast.
Thank you, Ganesh. Wonderful to see you. Take care.
Cheers.